We don't have a single positive experience. Everyone, including Trump, considers them an outright gang of thieves and bandits. Kuchma's invention with the Budapest Memorandum deceived all of Ukraine. I see a long war, another 3 or 4 years until probably another million young Ukrainians die, and then there will simply be no one left to send to the front, and that's when what I'm talking about begins.
Greetings, dear viewers. This is Vasily Zverev with you. As always, we try to talk about important things. Today, we have Leon Bainstein with us, a political scientist and public figure. Leon, hello.
Good afternoon. Always glad to see you, Vasily.
The feeling is mutual? Well, let's get straight to the point. The State Department officially stated that there were no agreements between Trump and Putin in Alaska. So, does it mean that Trump just cynically used the so-called spirit of Anchorage to string the Kremlin along and buy time for Ukraine? Or what's the deal?
Honestly, I don't know what's going on in Trump's head. And what kind of agreements could there be? Putin and Trump were, I think, alone in a car together for 40 seconds. Just the two of them, they didn't have any more time to make deals. If there were any agreements, it was something like, let's have a drink tomorrow. No, I can't. I have to fly out. My liver's not doing well. Well, goodbye for now. I don't understand what kind of agreements there were in Alaska, really. It's just not clear at all. Well, it was decent. He flew there, showed off a bit, talked, but nothing changed.
Thank you. That's exactly the point. But you saw how Russia has been speculating with that very spirit of Anchorage since last August. And here, well, in case any of our viewers happen to miss what's going on, let me remind you that U.S. Secretary of State Rubio officially stated that there were no agreements at the Trump-Putin meeting in Anchorage. Only some proposals were discussed. And I don't know where those leaks that ended up in the media came from, or if you can even call them leaks at all. Nevertheless, the media reported that supposedly Putin was counting on the surrender of Donbas, demanded 4 regions, and later allegedly agreed to a territorial exchange. And he started complaining that the Americans backed away from their promises under pressure from Europe. So basically the question is, Leon, why did the Kremlin, I repeat, cling so stubbornly to this myth about the spirit of Anchorage if, first of all, A, there was no legal document signed, and B, in fact, even informally, the U.S. never stated this?
Well, in my opinion, I'll start by answering the last part, and then I'll move on to the beginning of your question. In my opinion, the very fact that Putin left, I can't say exactly right now, either 2 or 2.5 hours earlier than planned. It was already mentioned that either some Russian, clear, quick agreements were reached. What should we have seen there in the next few days, a few weeks at most? Yes, and what didn't we see? Or maybe nothing was achieved, and both sides were waiting for something, because in America they also wrote that they were expecting Putin to come with some specific agreements or disagreements, but Putin started dragging things out again. I mean, I don't remember anyone ever, well, except for the opposition press, which just writes whatever it wants, right? Like, if I want to write that Vasya is a fool, I'll write it without any proof. But here, people were actually saying that nothing was achieved in Anchorage, and that it was a complete waste to go there. The only thing that might have happened is that some agreements were made during those 40 seconds. We don't know, but formally, on the contrary, it was a complete disappointment. And what was Russia saying there and why? Well, they probably had their own goals, maybe to fool someone, usually their own people, sometimes Ukraine, as an enemy. I don't know, I don't see anything else. I don't see anything that Rubio said now that would be different from what we've been hearing from the administration all this time.
But for Moscow, apparently, it's like a cold shower because the whole head of the foreign ministry, Lavrov, he expressed bewilderment at Rubio's words, he claims.
And I always believe Lavrov too, whatever he says. As soon as he says something, I definitely believe him. Also, when he says opposite things in one sentence, I still believe both.
Editor, so basically Moscow is now, through Lavrov, actually accusing the Trump administration of a cheap diplomatic trick, to put it simply.
Well, Okay, then I have a suggestion for Lavrov, whom everyone keeps saying looks like me. So poor Lavrov, by the way, he's an unfortunate man if he looks like me. So, well, let him put something on the table then, present it, yes, take it out. As Mayakovsky said, yes, from his pants, a duplicate of the priceless cargo. Look, be jealous, I am a citizen of the Soviet Union, and show what was said, and in where, what exactly is so cheap about this trick. The trick has already been repeated 100 times. I don't understand, well, maybe he said it more clearly, maybe some conversations in Europe reached Rubio or something else. He said, no, guys, we've said it 100 times, but nothing has been achieved. What agreements are you even talking about? What are you saying? That's all he said.
But nevertheless, if you look at the statements, let's say, that have been made by representatives of the American administration in recent weeks, then you should pay attention. For example, to the words of U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Levin, who said in Gdansk that Ukraine is winning the war and has gone on the offensive. He emphasized that the U.S. welcomes Zelensky's peace plan, but Putin rejected it. And that puts Trump in a difficult position as a mediator. And here, I would probably add that you've surely heard, right? When Trump, in one of his interviews, was asked if Ukraine is winning, he replied that Zelensky's doing pretty well, he's holding up well. What I'm getting at is that it seems like the administration's rhetoric has changed a bit. What is this connected to? Because some people say that, well, Russia, of course, also got stirred up about this and says, that's it, the states. Let's say the motives of the American administration, which now, at least in the public sphere, is showing a shift in its foreign policy regarding the Ukrainian-Russian war.
I don't believe that anyone in their right mind in Russia thought that America was on their side, right? So that's why they're turning around. America is going where it was always going. We have never been on Russia's side, a country that everyone, including Trump, sees as an utterly thieving criminal gang. We smile at them, we shake their hands because they have 1/6 of the land, a huge amount of minerals, and the atomic bomb. So it would be stupid, so to speak, to tell them that they're jerks, idiots, that we hate them, and so on. But they are jerks and idiots, and we hate them, so there is no turnaround. Of course. The thing is, Russia is trying more and more to help Iran, but not the Iran we are negotiating with, but specifically the armed forces that are fighting against us. And Russia is trying, so to speak, in every possible way to deliver weapons there, and besides, so to speak, there is a possibility that Russia is somehow acting together with Hezbollah, which I just mentioned as a suggestion. They don't have direct, I think, roots. I mean, there are direct routes, but deliveries there. But somehow they help. We don't like this mistake because we need to solve this problem. And when the problem was only between Ukraine and Russia, which in America is perceived as a small, deadly fight between brotherly nations. But you got involved simply because our previous administrations got involved, and you are forced to be there. Because logically, if previous administrations hadn't helped, hadn't made promises to help Ukraine, then starting from 1990, Ukraine would have understood that it was alone against Russia and would have acted completely differently. And it would have acted completely differently, built up its armed forces, its defense, and its relationship with its neighbor. But they thought they had someone in their pocket, some big guy who would come with a stick and beat up Russia. That's why they allowed themselves not to spend money on defense, to plunder the country and not care what the neighbor thinks, saying, we'll do whatever we want, right? It doesn't work that way. You live next to a gorilla who, as I already said, has a big club in its hands, and it's also drunk and aggressive. But you don't say to it, but I have another gorilla nearby who will come and beat you up. At some point, your gorilla will get drunk and hit you on the head with whatever it's holding in its hands. That's why everything is protected, although honestly, I don't think any of our administrations actually meant that. And by the way, the same thing happened with all of Europe, not just Ukraine. That kind of barking eventually came back and slapped it in the face, right? You think before you bark at someone if you don't have a gorilla behind you, behind your back. Yours, right? That's right. So, in a way, we're to blame for giving Ukraine this false sense of security. This whole Budapest fantasy of Kuchma's. You just said give up the nuclear weapons and then you don't take care of them. And about something rotting and exploding. Or, God forbid, you might sell it to someone there. To terrorists, right? Which, so to speak, had already started happening. And as we know, it was about that if someone attacks you, then we will all go complain about it to the United Nations. Well, that's what was written in that paper. I don't know if Kuchma or someone close to him personally got a lot of money in their pocket, or maybe one of his closest aides did. I don't know that. But I think he did. Because things like that are done for personal gain too. Well, they gave away that weapon, but they didn't do anything else. Because they deceived the whole nation. They said someone would come and protect us, but no one ever intended to come. No one intended to. Britain, right? Where would they come? Who would they protect? Are they crazy or something? They themselves only have 2 regiments of soldiers in all of Britain. Who are they going to protect? And from whom? America is far away. Why would anyone protect someone else? If a person, as it is said in the Bible, fights, then I will help you, God willing. But it's exactly the same principle. Fight, and then maybe we'll come to help you. And if you yourself, as they say, well, you are fighting now, and that's why, in general, help is coming. If you had surrendered right away, there would have been no help. We've gotten pretty far afield from what's happening. I've already answered the question.
Thank you. You mentioned that Europe barked from behind the United States for a long time, but now, as we can see, it's Russia that's barking. The Russian Foreign Ministry sent a warning to Washington that the transfer of weapons and intelligence to Ukraine, which I remind our viewers, has consequences for international security. And in this statement, once again, Moscow says that the US is drifting away from the understanding that was reached in Alaska, once again speculating on this story. But when the Russian Foreign Ministry talks about some unpredictable consequences, what do you think they mean? An attack on American satellites, which they've already talked about. Maybe it's some kind of technology transfer to the Houthis or something like that. How can they scare the United States?
Well, by actively helping Iran, actively helping Hezbollah, and actively helping the Houthis there. Honestly, I don't see anything else for now. I don't even know. Maybe Russia hitting an American base there. It sounds absolutely absurd. Why? You have to assume that there are people sitting in the Kremlin who want their property to be shot at, bombed, blown up, and so on. Well, are they crazy or what? Well, they're not crazy, but maybe they're a bit foolish in some ways. But to get up there, to sit at the top for so long, well, you can't be completely stupid. You have to be, at the very least, very cunning. That's what I think is happening. I haven't measured Vladimir Vladimirovich's IQ. I don't think it's very high, but his survival skills are probably very high. That's why he cares about himself, his health, his property, and possibly his family. I don't know who he considers his family. He, in general, is quite concerned about that. And all the others who live in the same place, I don't know, the O0 Cooperative, they're old enough to have grandchildren. Adults, yes, I'm sure they love their grandchildren. Why put them, these grandchildren, at risk? Most of them are in London and New York. Well, who is going to change this balance? No one. But all these sneaky games, right? Well, we supply weapons to Ukraine. They will supply weapons to Iran. Everything is fine.
You just mentioned Putin, about how they are also trying to be cunning. I'm sure you've heard Putin's statement from yesterday or the day before that he's ready for negotiations, but strictly on his own terms. And he kind of lumped everything together. He said that the basis is the Istanbul Agreement of 2022. Let me remind you, that's Ukraine's neutral status and limitations on its army. Plus the modalities of Anchorage. Anchorage came up again. And Putin's demands from 2024, and that, let me remind you, is the complete withdrawal of the Ukrainian armed forces from Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions within their administrative borders. But here's a question for you. How does Putin even manage to combine in one supposedly peaceful proposal both Istanbul 2022, where the regions were Ukrainian, and the demands of 2024 to give him regional centers like Zaporizhia and Kherson, which are under Ukrainian control?
Well, you see, it's easy. The answer, easy. Look, actually, after Zelensky's statement that Ukraine would bomb Belarus, a lot has changed, and he said it twice. The first time, we thought that maybe he, drank, smoked something, or just lost his mind at that moment. But then on the 19th, and then again on the 21st of this month, he repeated it a second time. And I think that he very seriously changed the trajectory of everything that was happening. Because if it's possible to bomb, that means Belarus, for helping, not participating in the war itself, but helping and providing for Russia, their training grounds or something else, or information, oil, and so on, then that means Russia gets, so to speak, new opportunities. So in other words, we have new rules now. Whoever helps Russia now has the right to consider them a target, right? So, well, that's what you call thanks to the brilliant leader of Ukraine. He has now given Russia a great opportunity to do, as they say, whatever they want. To any question, they will say, we are doing the same thing as Ukraine. Ukraine has declared that it's okay to bomb, to shoot there, and to do something else there, just because we placed our radars somewhere there. So does that mean that because you supply weapons to Ukraine, we can bomb you too, right? I don't think they're going to bomb anyone right now, like Poland or the Baltic countries and so on. But maybe they'll find something to blow up just to say, this is our retaliation for you allowing Ukraine, let's say, to send its people to Poland, right? By the way, they've also had a falling out with Poland, right? I think they won't be accepting people anymore, if I'm not mistaken. At least, not under the current president. That's it. And that means huge flows of European weapons were going through Poland. There's a serious possibility that Poland will now partially close this due to, again, the statements that were made by Ukraine. So, I don't know, the situation in Ukraine on the one hand is improving because of technology, drones, and Russia is also starting to feel uncomfortable. Although the most important thing is that people who live in Moscow, for them the most important thing is that people who live in Moscow and in St. Petersburg feel comfortable. They haven't felt any discomfort yet. Once drones or something else flew in, exploded 8 kilometers from the Kremlin, and they got scared. It seems they've calmed down again now. If this had happened 3, 4, 5, or even 10 times, things would be different. But now they've definitely returned to their restaurants and bathhouses, to their clubs. They travel abroad, but they don't go to those 5 countries. They go to other, like 20 countries. Nothing has changed. But in this sense, so to speak, of course, nothing has changed for Russia. But on the other hand, you see the provinces have already started to feel, well, that there's a war going on and the war is draining all sorts of resources and things like that. But the situation in terms of, the reduction of Russia's demands, as you noticed, hasn't happened. Why hasn't it happened? Because, why reduce the demands when Russia has nothing to gain if the war ends not on the terms that Putin is talking about? Only on the condition, only if Russia declares a total victory, then they can stop. And they declare a total victory if the conditions are like Minsk I or Minsk II or Istanbul or something like that. And those terms will be fully met. Plus, because they lost a lot of people, a lot of money, a lot, and they need to justify to their own people why they lost this money, years, people, and so on, and what they achieved with it. Now, what they've achieved is much better than before. Until they can show this, or until it becomes so painful that it's simply impossible to continue, this war will not end. So it actually depends on Ukraine. It is entering negotiations under roughly these kinds of conditions. I'm not calling for anything right now, I'm just trying to explain the situation. Either it enters negotiations under these conditions, or it continues to fight. Continuation.
And how do you see it? Will Ukraine keep fighting and Russia as well? Or will there still come a moment when the situation, let's say, on the battlefield, or maybe the situation in Crimea, will somehow influence the Kremlin?
The situation in Crimea won't affect Russia at all. It's too far away. And they don't really see Crimea as something important. They see Crimea as more of a trophy. Well, if something explodes there, they don't really care. Yeah? So is it pleasant? No. Well, it's not pleasant, but it's just mildly unpleasant. It's like once every 4 days in the commander's report, something about Crimea comes up for the commander, but that's about it. And the war will continue as long as one side doesn't decide that it needs to end. So, Ukraine, the Ukrainian leadership at the moment, I'll repeat, this is already the third time, we keep coming back to this from time to time, and I keep saying that nothing has changed there, like once a month. Nothing has changed. I don't see any reason for the Ukrainian leadership to end the war on any terms other than complete victory. Complete victory has been declared, meaning all Russian soldiers must withdraw from Ukrainian territory, including Crimea, because Crimea, so to speak, is considered Ukrainian territory from the point of view of the Ukrainian leadership. And maybe it is, I don't know, I'm not a specialist. That is, from a certain year, Crimea became part of Ukraine, and after that, Russia came and started, so to speak, changing this by force. So then, why does the Ukrainian leadership, which in my opinion is phenomenally profiting from this war, want it to end? To be at the center of the world, to hang out in all sorts of European capitals. I'm not talking about Zelensky specifically, I mean in general, all the others too. To drink champagne, to take pictures with all the most important people in the world, to listen to all the praise about themselves. But as soon as the war ends, first of all, there should be new elections, which means some people will lose their positions. And secondly, new elections might lead to someone saying, Sergei Ivanovich, just a second. It says here that we received $4 billion, so where is it? Only $100 million in weapons were delivered, so where did the rest of the money go? And it might start, maybe it will start, let's say. I would give it a 15% chance that it will start, and the remaining 85% that nothing will happen. No one will investigate, and anyone who needs to be bought off will be. People who are somehow involved or will be implicated will come to power anyway, so in reality, nothing will change. But there's a 15% chance that after the war, some groups might start digging into the gang that's in power now. And they will definitely find something because the Americans will gladly hand over a lot of information, and some Europeans who didn't get their share, so to speak, will also hand it over. That's why it's not beneficial for the Russian authorities to end the war, and it's not beneficial for the Ukrainian authorities to end the war either. So until something serious happens, either a catastrophe or something changes so drastically that it becomes terribly frightening, it will keep going, because it's the people who are dying. As for the people, the children of all the important decision-makers, as I already said, they're sitting in London, in New York, some in the Sorbonne in Paris. Well, there are very few left. But your children, that is the children of Ukrainians or Russians, basically no one cares about them on either side.
You say that something extraordinary, some kind of catastrophe has to happen, but what could be that very catastrophe that could lead to the end of this war? Probably...
And there's a coup happening in the Kremlin, but it's not a coup carried out by force. The KGB, well, what's it called now? The FSB, it doesn't matter, and they are even more so. They want to tighten control and lead the country into Stalinism, so to speak. Yes, well, let's say, so to speak, some other option. I don't see it. I would give it a 1% chance, because I just don't see it. I don't live there, so maybe I don't understand. Is there anything else in Russia, like, will something explode? No, they don't have anything like that. Nothing that could explode so much that they would get scared, right? And then China suddenly says that it stops cooperating with Russia. That's it, period. You do as you wish. We're separate, and we're against you waging war, right? That will make them seriously think about it. And from Ukraine's point of view, there will be cases of theft, looting, specifically stealing from people who joined the army to fight, who are dying, and they're being supplied with a huge amount of weapons that aren't being repaired and simply don't work, and so on. And this won't be possible to keep quiet like they did with previous stories. Well, something like that. Because honestly, Zelensky isn't planning to run for re-election, right? So, they won't let him, so to speak. And even if he decides himself, I'll get re-elected, I'll run away to some island like Madagascar, buy it and settle there. They won't let him do that either. And his own people, they won't let him do that. So, in other words, you won't have any re-elections. Yeah. Who knows? Maybe there's some kind of Russian offensive going on there that's just sweeping everything in its path. Well, then Ukraine says, okay, I'm ready to accept your terms. And then Russia says, no, now we want different terms. That's why, honestly, I don't see it. I just don't see it. I see a long war, another 3 or 4 years until probably another 1 million young Ukrainians die, and then there will simply be no one left to send to the front. That's when what I'm talking about starts to happen.
But against this background, it's probably worth quoting Zelensky, who stated in his address that Ukraine has a carefully worked out plan for a military operation in Crimea. According to him, if the G7 partners provide Kyiv with what was discussed in the negotiations, Ukraine will quickly create conditions under which Russia will be forced to choose peace. End of quote. That's the end. Do you think this is just some kind of media story, or does some kind of miracle weapon really exist there? Or is it some kind of financial decision from the G7 that Zelensky means when he talks about the ability to force Russia to peace through Crimea?
I just don't understand this. I mean, wasn't this the case before? And who will give it to him? He may want it, but who will give it to him? So, again, America is supposed to give some kind of weapon that it doesn't give because it's too advanced, as I understand it, right? America won't even sell to Europeans, or transfer weapons that are so revolutionary that you can't even talk about them, right? If we're talking about getting more of what we already have, that's not going to happen either. Now, the first tranche has arrived, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, from Europe. These 90 billion euros. So Europe wants to prolong the war, that's absolutely clear. If Europe didn't want the war to continue, if they didn't want it, they would act differently. They're doing a very simple, straightforward thing. They're supporting military actions. And by supporting military action aimed at victory, it means that if they start to defeat Russia, Russia might get very angry and do something bad, right? Nobody in Europe wants that because they still depend on Russia. It's a strange game. But Europe doesn't give anything like that to Ukraine and doesn't even buy from America anything that would provoke the Kremlin. Because if the Kremlin really gets provoked, Europe will have a cold winter, and that's what they fear most, because their voters will choose someone else. That's why this nonsense happens. We will depend on Russia, but at the same time, we will keep buying. You know, back in the day, before World War II, Japan got itself into a similar situation. 80% of their energy came from the United States. So when Roosevelt didn't like something, Roosevelt was the president at that time. Yes, so he issued an order not to sell anything related to energy to Japan anymore. And Japan calculated and found out that they had, as they said, about a year and a half, if they tightened everything, saved everything, and so on, just enough for some tractors and tanks to keep moving at all. And they realized that if they didn't attack right away, they would simply be left with nothing. Everything would come to a halt. So, to put it this way, as soon as you get into this kind of dependence, like Europe, for example, they started giving up Russian oil and switched completely to what kind of oil? From that very same Persian Gulf, which Iran is now talking about. And now they say, We've closed it, and that's it. And what are you going to do now? Yeah? So when you were completely dependent on someone, America did the same thing before Trump. At least now we're fixing it. 90 or maybe 80% our rare earth metals come from China or from companies controlled by China. What does that mean? And that means we have 6 more months of military production, and after 6 months it ends if they cut us off. So countries keep making this completely foolish mistake over and over again. Because it's cheaper, because it's better, or simply because someone got bribed. Why did Europe switch from its own coal to Russian gas, which made it possible for the Russians to immediately increase the price tenfold, not by 10% but 10 times, from 30 to 300 per 1,000 kilometers of gas? You know, someone got paid, someone voted, someone got caught with something and was blackmailed, and something else happened to someone else, and suddenly a decision is made that later puts the country in dependence. Currently, Ukraine is entirely reliant on receiving weapons. No matter the amount provided, this dependence remains, right? So, with smiles, sly little smiles, but it means that the people who are giving this weapons never wanted to give enough weapons for Ukraine to win. They want to give weapons so that maybe they want Russia to get stuck there. Maybe they just want to profit from the war. Maybe something else. I don't know their motives. I only see the result. The result is as follows. Ukraine gets just enough weapons for the war to continue.
When you say people are giving that much weapons, do you mean specific people?
I mean the leadership of Europe, let's say the European Union, and the leadership of America, the one that was there until recently. The latest one, it just acts differently. That doesn't mean they're exactly angels, right? They just have different goals, that's all. Their goal is to stop wars for a number of their own reasons. Again, that doesn't mean they're really that good with wings and all. They want to stop wars. Maybe to stop them in a way that some of those involved in these wars don't like, right? So the goal is just different, right? The goal is different. Trump has a different goal, not to steal like Obama, right? Obama left, stopped being president. He unexpectedly received $100 million within a year. $100 million. $38 million was received by his other wife as an advance for a book. I don't even know if she wrote it or not. But who can justify $38 million by selling a book by Michelle Pavla? No one. Nobody the hell needs it. So $38 million for this, $38 for that, $12 for HBO for the fact that he might produce some program someday. In other words, they paid him back, right? So his whole presidency he worked so that when he goes into so-called retirement, he would end up with a lot of money. That's what happened. Clinton finished, so they stole from Clinton. They stole a bunch of furniture and dishes from the White House. This is officially documented. They just stole it. When asked, did you at least sign a mutual agreement? Well, it doesn't matter. So some time passed and it turned out they also had $100 million. Yes. Gore, who was the vice president, left, and it turned out he was even better off. He ended up with $200 million, but he was inside all the cash flows. In that sense, he's cooler than Clinton. Clinton is a bigger politician than he is. But he's cooler in terms of the cash flow. He got an Oscar, he got a Nobel Prize, and he got $200 million. Well, for Trump, the challenge is just different. $200 million isn't enough for him to feel anything. He already has 385. I haven't counted how many billions he has. And for him, do you want 100 millions? Well, take your 100 million and get lost. Right? So it's just different there. He wants an everlasting monument. And I'm all for that because a monument is better than a drum. You understand the difference, right? One wants to become the best, to do everyone a favor. That means just stealing money from me, so that part of it comes back to him later. That's why I'm for it. I'm in favor of it for very prosaic reasons.
How is it unexpected? Many were waiting for it. As reported just a couple of hours ago by the Ukrainian President's Commissioner for Sanctions Policy, Vlasyuk, tough U.S. sanctions against Russian oil are once again fully in effect after a period of certain relaxations. If that's the case, then here's the question. Why is Trump bringing back the sanctions right now? Why didn't he do it earlier, as soon as the issue with Iran was resolved? Why didn't he do it later? Why didn't he wait a bit longer?
Because we set a goal to extract a certain amount of oil from the Persian Gulf. And only now, just the day before yesterday, we announced that we had secretly extracted 100 million barrels of oil from there, balanced the market, increased our production, and so on. And we can go back to all our previous, so to speak, games, right? In other words, we set ourselves the goal of extracting 100 million barrels, and we did it.
So basically now it's possible to put pressure on Russia with sanctions.
Yes, although for the previous X years, I don't even remember how many, they've been putting pressure on Russia with these sanctions. And some of their sanctions actually ended up benefiting Russia a lot. They had to develop their own industries, and some sanctions actually improved their ties with the global south. Yes. And of course, some of the sanctions did hit them and so on, but the real impact will be felt in 15 or 20 years when the lack of modern technology starts to really hurt them. But for now, I would say that the sanctions against Russia are having a neutral or even slightly positive effect. As for the 30, 40, or 50 oligarchs and their families who can't travel to France or Spain anymore, they've already gotten over it. They've sold their yachts, villas, and so on. At first, they were shocked, but now they've realized that there are great places to relax in China and on all sorts of islands, Galapagos or whatever. So they still have plenty of options. And those same girls they used to call over in France now just fly out to them instead. So I don't think this really shook up Moscow or St. Petersburg. They haven't been affected by this at all. As several of my Russian correspondents explained to me, they're middle-class people, and while it does affect them, it's not that bad. They say, approximately the cost of everything has increased by about 10 to 15%, so to speak, for things that were not in short supply because of the sanctions. I asked, how exactly? They say either through Turkey or through China, meaning delivery costs about 10 to 15% more. So cheese used to cost X, and now it costs X plus 15%. They say, for us, this doesn't really matter at all.
Since we've already mentioned Iran, there's something else I wanted to ask you about. The US Senate passed a resolution that blocks military action against Iran without Congress's approval. Trump said that Iran is on the ropes, ready to give up everything. He said the senators helped the enemy and called the Republicans who voted for it losers. And soon, under pressure, I don't know from whom, probably the party leadership, the senators withdrew their votes and changed the result in Trump's favor. Trump is satisfied, publicly thanked the party leaders, and said that this vote will put Iran in an awkward position. This whole business of the senators withdrawing their votes almost instantly, what does it indicate? Is this a demonstration of Trump's absolute control over the party, or is it a sign of some kind of harsh internal voice?
Which obviously isn't quite the way it seems. The interim part was released in that report which you obviously read. Namely, those senators who resisted were called to the White House. Not for a meeting with Trump. They were placed in a room where the classified documents are kept, and they were given a briefing with the documents. After that, at least one senator made a statement. I didn't know what I just learned, and I'm changing my opinion. In other words, they were brought in and shown something. Senators aren't just ordinary guys. They didn't end up there by accident, so to speak. These are people who have gone through serious training, both before they got there and while they were there and so on. So when they change their opinion, it means it's based on something. Now, even when the head of the party, well, the party leader, officially, which is completely the President of the United States of America, because that's Trump, right? That's an official position. The party leader is the president. So when it's not a presidential system, then someone is chosen. But when there is their own president, then he is the party leader. So this shows that even when the party leader wants something, insists on something, nevertheless his fellow party members who seem to support him, they say, I have a different opinion on this matter. My conscience or my understanding or something else tells me that I won't vote the way you say, period, and they vote differently. That's amazing. It means that by contrast, the Democratic Party never does that. In the Democratic Party, sometimes there's one person, or at most two, right? Right now, that one is, what's his name? Oh my God, I forgot his name. A senator, tall, heavy set, bald head. I just can't remember his name. It happens, right? So, right now, they kind of have that kind of conscience and honor of the era. He says, guys, what are you doing? You can't always vote the way the party tells you. Sometimes you have to think for yourselves too, right? That's it. And the Republicans, in this sense, have much less discipline, which means there's more democracy, which makes it harder to get certain things done. That means you have to be convinced. Right now, they've convinced you. Now, they called us somewhere where you can show things while sitting. You can't. For some reason, they're afraid to take people out, right? But they called. People came. They watched, and they said, yeah, well, damn, we didn't know that. Now we know, and now we'll vote like this.
I really wanted to ask you about another case. Four-star General Christopher Donahue, who led the U.S. Army Command in Europe and Africa, played a key role in logistics, and of course not just for us. It's for everyone, it's for everyone, it's for everyone, it's for everyone, for everyone, it's for everyone. Assistance to Ukraine. They are being removed during the purges of the High Command by Hegseth under the slogan as it went, fewer generals, more soldiers. If I'm not mistaken, Donahue's position is downgraded to a 3-star rank himself. The American command in Europe is reducing its presence amid pressure from Trump, who is demanding that I take on the costs of the war in Ukraine. I'm just reminding our viewers, and it's probably symbolic, that Donahue was the last U.S. soldier to leave Afghanistan in 2021. That's, I don't know, there's a hex there. It could be, for that very shameful withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan, or maybe it's really some kind of systematic dismantling of the American support system for Ukraine, for example, because, well, let me remind you that Donahue was actually one of the key figures in helping Ukraine.
Revenge is unlikely. I mean, it could easily be. Everyone is human. And especially Trump is sure that he has this little streak. That streak, but when he needs them to do something, he immediately forgets all that and offers them a place in his administration and so on. We've seen this many times already, but here, maybe I would rather rule out revenge because a lot of time has passed. And secondly, the withdrawal from Afghanistan is not associated in the American mindset, in people's minds. With the name Donahue, it's not connected. I mean, we all know that he was there, but there's nothing like blaming him or looking for something on him. There's nothing like that. With Ukraine, I don't know, anything is possible. I think most likely another system is being built or something different, I don't know. There, it's called the chain of command in the army. And it's quite possible that Donahue just didn't fit into it. Because I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. Here's the thing. I can tell you what I don't think, but as for why they're really replacing him, maybe he isn't as fast anymore. We don't know. Maybe it's something with his superior. Nobody wants to talk about it. Maybe it's something else. We also don't know if there's some other reason. It seems like there isn't one. Yeah, who knows? Maybe it's someone official, someone under him. People started saying, guys, he's, let's say, starting to slur his words a bit and so on.
Who knows, and so on. We've already touched a bit on the topic of Iran. There's something else I'd like to ask you about. According to a large-scale survey by the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, 92% of Israelis consider Iran the winner in the 6-week war. Almost 83% are confident that the campaign has undermined Israel's long-term security, and 88% believe that the objectives have completely failed. And actually, the question is probably about these numbers. Are these figures a verdict on Netanyahu personally, or on the entire concept of Israel's invincibility in the Middle East? Because it seems strange that despite the IDF's total technological dominance, 92% of Israeli citizens feel like losers in the war with Iran.
I think that national resentment is at play here because, well, it's very significant. The expectation was that now, finally, Netanyahu is on good terms with Trump, and Trump in general is doing much more for Israel than all the other presidents. And there's even a rumor going around America that supposedly Netanyahu is almost in charge, and finally, together, we're going to completely destroy Iran. Students are a very amusing measure of emotions and a very poor measure of logic. And I myself was, as they say, a student once, so I know exactly what this is about. The thing is, let's pause for a second. If we approach this without emotion, like Israelis do, I'm also an Israeli by passport, just so you know. I fought in Israel, did reserve duty there, even flew from America back for it, so to speak, when there was the Revolt operation and so on. That's why this is close to me. I have dual citizenship. I'm American and Israeli, and so to speak, God forbid, if I ever have to choose, I would be in a state of absolute terror. I hope I never have to. So, let's remember what happened after World War I.
What?
Germany was offered and forced to sign conditions that were absolutely humiliating, which led to massive inflation and huge problems. And this, in turn, led to the rise of Hitler. Hitler? You'll understand that I'm not making this up or quoting myself. Now, when we attacked Iraq, right? And it's completely unclear why we got involved in the conflict between Iraq and Kuwait. Well, I think Kuwait paid our senators a lot of money. That's what I think, because otherwise I don't see any reason to get involved in this story. Well, fine, so we attacked Iraq, defeated it, smashed it, caught Saddam Hussein, and Iraq became much worse than it was before. We attacked Libya. Libya had previously given up its nuclear weapons, all its nuclear development work, did everything we asked. But nevertheless, we attacked it, destroyed it, and Libya became much worse than it was before. I can continue this list, one after another, one after another. Vietnam. We got involved in Vietnam, and after we left, things got worse. We got involved in Korea, and after we left, things got worse. Half of Korea became, well, let's just say we know what that is, right? So, in other words, that's experience. We don't have a single positive experience where we defeated someone, established our own order, changed the government, and then things got better. I can say that even after the revolution in France, the Bastille, and so on, things also got much worse. I can give you 20 more examples of how after internal revolutions, upheavals, uprisings, and so on, things didn't get better, but worse. Not once. The Soviet Union replaced the Russian Empire, and so on and so forth. That is so far the history of humanity over the last century or century and a half shows that as soon as you change the government and either another strong authority comes in or there is a power vacuum, the country ends up worse off than it was before. What do they want? Do they want us to do the same thing all over again? Well, they surveyed the students, and they really want that girl to give it to them as soon as possible. And then she got pregnant, and they know that they don't know what to do about it.
No, it wasn't the students who were surveyed, it was the Jewish university that conducted the survey. Okay?
Very good. Very good. So, Israelis, despite my great love for this country, I lived there for many years. I fly there very often. I do much more for Israel than most Israelis who live there. I say this in all seriousness. So I think that Israelis are like big children. They've been offended. They're upset that their problem with Iran wasn't solved for them. Well, they're offended, yes. The survey wasn't of students. It was of people on the streets. I'm absolutely sure that if I call my own brother now, who's a bit younger than me, he'll tell me exactly the same thing. Not because he's stupid, but because he's offended. I haven't talked to him about this. Well, I'm sure he'll say that, so to speak. And his kids, who are captains, majors in the army, who haven't served for a long time already, they already have kids of their own who are about to go into the army. But nevertheless, so to speak, they'll probably say exactly the same thing. Because they don't do analysis. Because they're busy with other things. They're doctors, they're engineers, they're writers, they're someone else, teachers. Damn, once again this Netanyahu couldn't get the job done. That bastard Trump made promises. And what did Trump promise? The same thing America promised Clinton. That's what they think. They can't see the big picture. I know they're in pain and feel hurt right now.
And finally, one more question which in one way or another also concerns Israel. Netanyahu stated that Israel should get rid of its military dependence on the United States, to create its own independent weapons production system, that the outcome of the struggle with Iran depends only on the country's own strength. Let me remind you, he flatly refused to withdraw troops from southern Lebanon. Despite the U.S. agreement with Iran, the media reports that Washington and Tel Aviv have begun negotiations to move from military aid to a mutual partnership. Earlier, Vice President Vance reminded Israel that 2/3 of its weapons are paid for by American taxpayers and demanded not to interfere with peace with Iran. These statements by Netanyahu about independence from the U.S., about a closed cycle of high-tech weapons production without billions, without U.S. technologies, what does this mean? Is this a kind of blackmail of the White House, or is it a real strategic plan?
Well, I think, let's see, if I just answer, it will be just as unclear and just as questionable as his own opinion, right? Let's approach this a bit more deeply, as any analyst should. Does Israel depend on supplies today? On supplies of American weapons? Yes, it does. How much does it depend? The answer is very much. Israel has enough for half a year, maybe even less, to defend itself with things like the Iron Dome and so on, against the rockets that Hezbollah has and so on. In half a year, in 7 months, in 8 months, there will be nothing left to defend with, right? So, in other words, the leaders of Israel absolutely 100% know that they can't breathe in or out without a certain amount of support. You know, like they used to say about Echo of Moscow, right? They, up to a certain point, could play the opposition, meaning they could be anti-government, anti-Putin. At key times, they received a call and repeated exactly what they were told. So you can dance up to this point, but beyond that, no. So you pretend to be part of the opposition, but in reality, you're the most loyal servant. So what is Israel today? After that, they tell him, "Are you crazy or what? We're done supplying you, that's it, goodbye." And what does Israel do? In other words, Netanyahu has long shown that he's not an idiot. He's a very talented person. He's in the top 3, maybe top 4 now, let's say, with the arrival of the Argentine comrade. Probably in the top 4 of the wisest leaders on earth. Wise, I mean not cunning like Putin, but truly wise. So this person, to say no to the Americans, no, no, and no, within his own permitted and agreed upon boundaries, within the rules of the game, but a 100% no, that's impossible, because it simply can't be. In other words, what do we have with Gus? With Gus, we have the following. This is what you call a backroom deal. You guys say that you're independent from us so that Iran can't make any claims against us. We say that we don't make decisions that Israel needs. That way we fend off the anti-Semites inside. It's the same with the Republicans. Republican parties like Tucker Carlson and the like, Candy Sovin, say that the Jews run everything. There you go. Both sides show that we're independent from each other. We do this, and Israel does that. And we even tell each other what bastards you are. And tomorrow we'll change everything. We're shaking our fists. From my point of view, I see nothing here except playing to the audience. I just don't see anything. I just can't imagine. I can't imagine that for 6 hours the Israeli army couldn't fly out and stop Hamas. Strike. I can't imagine it. I was in the army. 2 hours after we were raised at night on NTB, we were already halfway to Alexandria, uncovering the guns and showing the Egyptians in Alexandria that they shouldn't stop our planes. It took us 2 hours to fully assemble, gear up, and get on the guns. These are self-propelled. But here in 6 hours, they couldn't. For more than 5 hours, they couldn't send soldiers there. That means something's wrong. And it's exactly the same here. Something's wrong. And what exactly is wrong, in my opinion, is absolutely clear. And right now, it's beneficial for both sides to play the game of pretending they're not dependent on each other.
Thank you, Leon, for being with us. I'm always glad to talk with you, always happy to hear your point of view and listen to your analysis. I'd like to remind our viewers that we were joined by political scientist and public figure Leon Weinstein, so don't forget to like and don't forget to comment. Thank you, viewers, for watching all of this. And I hope you'll definitely write something. Leon also enjoys reading the comments.
Yes, really, 2 or 3 days after it comes out, I always go in and see what people are writing. I'm curious what they're saying.
Thank you. Thanks again to everyone. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your loved ones. See you.